It may not even seem possible from time to time. How do you have a peaceful joint custody arrangement? I've got an expert to help us with that today. Attorney and child custody expert Sid Unruh is with us again. Sid, you've been on a couple of other episodes here with me.
Yeah, it's been very enjoyable.
We have had a lot of traction on videos related to child custody because this is something that happens a lot to really great families. When there's a multiple household family, Sid, in your work as an attorney, what is required to have a peaceful joint custody arrangement?
Well, one thing that I've noticed is that this might just seem really bizarre, but I think I have a peaceful joint custody arrangement with my own wife, who I'm married to.
Okay, well, I hadn't thought about that angle.
Yeah, it's just sort of interesting. One thing that my wife and I realized early on in our marriage, and when we started having kids, is that we have different approaches to how to handle our kids.
Of course you do.
We have different methods of discipline. We have different methods of listening and caring. We have different methods of showing affection. It's just a very interesting thing. And so I realized that in my divorcing clients, one of the things that they focus on that my wife and I don't focus on is each other. And they focus on sort of like, oh, I'm doing it right and the other person's doing it wrong. But my wife and I came to focus on is the children. And we were focusing on the results.
Good point.
And so what I try to get my clients to do is focus on the kids. And I point this out to them when they're in a joint custody situation, especially when they come to me because there's some kind of a problem. We analyze what the problem is, but I always ask, who are you focusing on? Are you trying to get the other guy, or are you trying to make things better? Or are you trying to make the kids have a good outcome here? And
Beautiful.
if they can focus on that, then that sort of changes the whole idea of what to work on.
It gets us back to what's right instead of who's right.
Right.
And what's right is focusing on the kids.
Right. And then I think the next thing I try to get them to focus on is themselves. They're always focused on what the other person's doing wrong, or what the other person should be doing, or something like that. And I say, okay, you know what? It's just none of your business. They're going to do what they're going to do. And maybe you can invite them to do something different, or have a conference about it, or whatever. But focus on what you can do different. Focus on what you can do better. Focus on what your influence is in this equation.
Yes.
And I love that and that's what my wife and I do in our own marriage. I focus on what I'm good at, she focuses on what she's good at, and together we create something. And so co-parenting, whether you're divorced or married, really has to do with focusing on the children first and focusing on yourself.
One way I've talked about this with my clients, Sid, some of whom are the same clients you've had, as you know, is to solve the problems in your own world. And to understand that, if you think of the children having one world, and then when mom and dad separate, it's like there are now two worlds that are related but very different. And it's really easy for me over here in dad's world to look over here at mom's world and look at all the things that should change, or that I don't like, or that need to happen differently. Well, that's just frustrating. And it annoys everybody else.
Exactly.
So solve the problems in your own world, and I guarantee you're going to find some. And if you can't, then listen to what the other world's saying, and they'll help you.
Exactly. So then the third thing I think that we should focus on are the mechanics. You're going to have to figure out who's going to give a ride here, whose turn is it to do the transportation, who's going to show up, who's going to take the children to the school play, who's going to be there for the school play, and all those kinds of things, who's going to be there for parent-teacher conferences, those kinds of things. There needs to be some kind of meeting of the minds to get the mechanics right. Now, some parents just don't like to talk to each other after they're divorced, but really, to focus on the children, you need to have some kind of idea of what the other person can expect from you, and what you can expect from the other person, so that you aren't leaving kids stranded. This happened just recently in one of my client situations. I was talking to a client, and all of a sudden she got a call, and she said, "Oh, Sid, I have to take this." It was the school. She had forgotten it was her turn to pick up the child from school. She thought she had made her appointment so that when her ex-husband was going to pick up the child from school, and her child was there for an hour late, longer than he should have been. And that's just really a sad thing.
So we have to work out the mechanics, the nuts and bolts.
Right.
You've also noticed, I'm sure, Sid, because you and I have talked about this before, that once you work it out, you have to have a certain level of flexibility still.
Oh, absolutely.
If you get too rigid about it,
right,
you will encounter frustrations with this.
And then it's easy to focus on the other parent again and say, oh, he just didn't fulfill his commitment or whatever. But the truth is, things happen to all of us. Flat tires happen. Rain happens. I mean, there are just all sorts of things that happen.
Well, I'm thinking back to what you said earlier about how you have a peaceful joint custody arrangement with your wife.
Yeah.
To whom you are married
yes.
and with whom you reside.
Exactly.
And even there, things come up.
That's right.
Things that are unexpected. So being flexible, but still having an understanding of what my roles and responsibilities are, when my responsibilities are going to show up for certain events or for responsibilities related to the children. So having a good understanding of that and agreement, but then being flexible to shift as things change.
Exactly. And being able to shift is an awesome thing. The next suggestion I have is to seek to be fair. And what I mean by that is when you're co-parenting, there are going to be times when you're going to feel like you're keeping score. And this happens with my wife and I too. Sometimes I think, well, I took the kid to this place. Or the one that comes up right now is I picked up our daughter from her work. And my wife says, well, I'm just too busy to do it. Can you do it again? And then I realized I'm keeping score. This is just not right. Don't keep score. But do be fair. Now, in a co-parenting situation, in a divorce situation, there is some legal aspect to it. I mean, you can actually change the custody dynamic if you give and take too much. If I have a client right now who now has custody of his child because the mother started off giving him every weekend instead of every other weekend. And then she started giving him 3 days every weekend. And then she started off giving him 4 days a weekend. And then pretty soon he had the child most of the time. And he said, why am I paying the child support and all this kind of stuff? And it's really interesting because when we brought that to her attention and when we decided we were going to do something about it legally and switch the dynamic legally so that she was paying the child support, she was, what are you talking about? I'm just being nice. Well, they'd really never had the conversation about what was really going on, and it was really costing him more money. He was actually spending more time with his child. He was actually cutting things out of his life so that he could spend more time with his child parenting, which is something he wanted to do and chose to do. But if he had only had every other weekend and one evening a week like normal, which is unfortunately a normal, I think, but that's another topic. But if he had only had that, then his plans for his life would be different. It is good to be fair about things, though. If, for example, there's a special family reunion and it happens to cover, and this happens almost every summer, it happens to cover the 4th of July or the 24th of July in Utah, where it's a big celebration here, then it's okay to say, hey, can I have your holiday, even though it's your holiday, and you can have this other makeup time, things like that. So it's good to sort of coordinate, hold your own ground, and yet make sure you're being fair about it and just not try to take advantage. I think one thing that is another idea of focusing on what the other's doing instead of focusing on what you're doing. And I like to have my clients focus on what would you think is fair. A lot of times when a client comes to me and says, I want to do this. Do you think this is okay? I say, well, if it were the other way around and the other person wanted to do it, would you think that's fair? And sometimes they're like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. And because
they're so absorbed in their own selfish desires at that point.
Exactly. So just be fair-minded. I think that's very important. And being fair-minded is good for the kids. And again, that's focusing on the kids. And also, always think about what the kid's perspective is. If the kid is thinking, do I have to go spend all this time with all these old people again? For a family reunion, for example, sometimes that's not the best use of parent time because you're not really with them anyway. You're trying to show them off to your family or whatever. Don't get me wrong, I think there's a time and place for that as well. I'm just saying, though, sometimes looking at the kid's perspective, getting their input is a good idea, especially when they're older.
And take a little time to think it through.
Yeah.
You know what, it's surprising. Maybe it doesn't surprise me after all, but how much of this comes back to just being a decent human being who takes the time to think things through. And honestly, divorce brings out the worst in people.
It's true.
And you're not immune from that. So even though you're an awesome person, the dynamics that are inherent in a divorce situation, especially when there's a custody issue involved, bring out the worst in people. So watch out for that. Pause. Do a little self-check every so often to see if you're being a decent human being who's got compassion and empathy and a sense of forgiveness in your heart. Anyway, I could go off on a soapbox with that.
I know, me too.
But I think it gets summed up with, let's see what we can do to create and generate some peace, to seek for that peace.
Exactly, and seeking for peace is excellent. I just have one more thing I want to mention, and that is as the kids get older, and this is what my wife and I have done as well, they know what they like to do with me, and they know what they like to do with her.
Right.
I think it's okay. It's not okay legally to have the kids be the communicators between the parents, but it's certainly okay for you to be the communicator with your own child and say, hey, what would you like to do? Sometimes we think that it's all about what I have to come up with and what I think is fair and what I'm doing in relation to the other parents.
Or what my rights are,
or what
I'm
rights are.
entitled
Yes,
to.
focusing on that. But again, focusing on the children also includes getting their input. And I think that's just a beautiful thing. I didn't realize that my daughter loved to go out to dinner with me. I mean, who wouldn't love to go out to dinner with me, right? But some of my kids are like, oh, Dad, I like to go out to lunch or dinner with my friends. But I have a daughter right now who every once in a while we just go out to dinner, probably once or twice a month, and she just really enjoys it, and I really enjoy it. And I haven't had that with some of my other kids, and it's just a very sweet thing.
Yes.
And I, arranged time with my wife. I explained to my wife, hey, tonight it's going to be daddy-daughter night. And of course, with my wife, I can usually arrange a time when she's doing something else anyway. And the same with co-parenting. Usually you can find times to fit those things in. And also, that's just another point. If you have multiple kids, it's still okay to focus on one kid at a time sometimes. I have one client who has 4 kids, and he makes sure one evening each month is devoted to one of his 4 children. So
just one-on-one time.
Exactly. And I think that's beautiful. And that's not, someone could say, oh, well, he's not taking all of his kids that one evening a week. Well, he's worked it out with his ex that he gets to have that time, and it doesn't take away from his other time. He gets a little bit extra time other times.
And you don't have to be divorced.
No, and you don't have
to apply some of these principles. So think about that as well.
So co-parenting and divorce is more difficult because the divorce makes you focus on the divorce.
Yeah.
But the truth is, we all co-parent who are parents. And being a divorced person, if you can just keep your focus on the kids and on the same things you would be focusing on if you were still married, you'll really have a lot more success.
Sid is a great example of how experience and knowledge can really empower our lives. You'll find Sid along with other Live on Purpose certified coaches at liveonpurpose.coach.